Not a lot. It was hard for me too. Yeah. Or just want to know what's I was trying this and I tried this, but it didn't work. I could try one more time. Oh, really? And then you can submit it to their like almost like you could have done it. Okay, this doesn't have. Actually, I do. And if it's not working, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I like one more minute and then we'll talk about it together. I had school. That is a completely crazy. What is it? My kids would love it because it's what.
That's the color.
Just the color.
And then they're.
All right, everybody have a chance to kind of go over it for a minute? On the plus side too, I forgot to mention, and it kind of feels like Christmas morning. Like for me today, I'm so excited. Little things in life, right? I got a new bulb in the projector. So nice, right? We have internet in here, and my laptop is connected to the projector. It's like Christmas Day. I mean, just the little things in life, right? We have to find joy in them. So what I'm gonna try and do, and I'm trying it out for the first time today, is I'm recording this on Zoom. So you won't be able to see anything but the screen, right? But if you were to miss a class because you weren't feeling well or for whatever reason, you should be able to listen to the lecture, listen to the audio. You won't get the clips, like the video clips may or may not go through. But just because like size wise, it really messes with the file. But I am recording the audio, so it probably won't pick all of you up very well, but it should pick me up okay. So you'll have to let me know. I tried to do it yesterday and I forgot that I turned the video on and the whole video was just like my stomach. I was like, I'm not posting that. So I turned the video off today. I learned my lesson, but we'll see. I'm trying it out today. And hopefully what that will do is if you want to listen to it later or if you miss, that should make your life a little bit easier. We'll see how it goes, but very exciting, right? Just in time for the weekend, everything's working. Knock on something. So let's go over this. And then I'll collect it. Number one with Brian. Anyone going to share your thoughts? What do you think is going on with Brian? You had to yes, thank you.
I did conversion disorder.
Okay.
Because it describes something sort of conflict that affects the motor/sensory function.
Okay. And that's perfect, right? So conversion disorder, I think, fits Brian really well. Right. There's nothing, as I said, there's no broken bones, there's no spinal damage. There's nothing physically wrong with him, but because of the trauma that he had, he converts it into a physical problem because he can't deal with it emotionally, right? So just think about that word, conversion, convert it, right? And hopefully that will help you to remember. That's perfect. Thank you. How about Blanca and her children? And I know, it's like things are beeping at me. Yeah.
Their children became sexual around her and she was
Yeah, right. And so you could have written factitious or fictitious disorder. That would have been acceptable as well. But I think this one is the one that fits the best, right? Munchausen by proxy. She's making somebody else sick in order to receive attention. Really sad, but this stuff does happen, right? And oftentimes social workers are involved whenever kids are in the hospital, even for like really benign reasons. Like my daughter, Emma, went in for a urinary tract infection and a social worker came in to check in with us. And they do that, right? Just to make sure that everything is as it should be. And so they catch on to that, right? And that definitely fits the best. How about Tom, our Chicago lawyer? Any thoughts on Tom? Anyone willing to share your thoughts on him? Yeah, thank you.
Illness and right.
Yeah, I think that fits great. Why did you put that one?
because he's worried about like what cancer his dad had it. Like, he wants so many different doctors' opinions because he's just not satisfied with them.
Yeah, that going from doctor to doctor to doctor is so typical of somebody with illness anxiety disorder, right? Looking for that kind of more severe diagnosis. The fact that his dad had serious medical issues only fuels it. Very, very common. Last one, number 4. I was going to say Kim. This could totally have been Kim here, but Leslie, right? Leslie. Anyone want to share your thoughts on Leslie? Last one, number 4. Let's see if anybody else. If not, I'll come back to you. Yeah, thank you.
Factitious disorder.
Okay, that was totally weird.
She intentionally thinks things
Yeah,
instead of like
actually being pregnant, right? Yeah, and you could have put factitious or you could have put Munchausen. Remember that they're kind of the same thing, right? Munchausen is just a popular name for factitious or fictitious disorder. So either one would be fine, but fakes the entire thing, just like Kim did, right? And again, these are all real news stories. I shortened them down, but these are all stories that made the news. And so doing all of that for attention, none of it was real. And that's very common
Munchausen's syndrome or disorder or factitious disorder. Yeah. So why did you think pain disorder? So let's go with that. Let's talk about it a little more.
Moderate stomach pain,
Sure.
and then he started to believe that it was psychologically worse than he had thought. So he sought out more doctors to see the severity of it and to see if it was linked to some kind of cancer.
Yeah, so I'm just like going through it again. So I mean, the only thing that he is experiencing, right, is pain. So I mean, you could make a case for that. I think that in my mind, the illness anxiety is the best fit, but I think that would be acceptable because he doesn't have other things going on, right? It's just that one element of pain. So you could make a good case for that for sure. I would still accept that. I think illness anxiety fits a little better just because that like doctor going to multiple doctors and seeking that, but that would work as well. I look forward to reading your number 5, the examples that you came up with. So if you want to make sure that your name is on there, go ahead and pass them up and I'll come around and grab them from you. All right. And I don't know how many of you saw, but I did post this on Canvas. So what I'm going to try and do, and I've been really on it this semester just because of the nature of the semester. And whenever I give out like a homework assignment, I will post it on Canvas. So if you ever miss, not a bad idea to check Canvas for that announcement and hopefully a recording, right? We'll see how that goes. But I'm trying to get that all up there for you. And if you ever miss, you can also submit it through that participation link. So it was under participation number 1. You could open it up like you would with the paper and at the top, click submit assignment and submit it there if you weren't able to come the day that it was due. Or you could email it to me, but that's probably the fastest way. Yeah. Yeah, so we left off, this is still chapter 8. So we left off, we went over this one. And then we just have a couple slides left of chapter 8. Okay. All right, so last few things here. And again, these disorders, the names, they're so confusing, right? And I want to apologize for that, not that I named them, but it does make it a little bit confusing. There's one more group here, and these are ridiculously common. Just looking at this list, I imagine a lot of people struggle with something on this list. That's just so common to have things like insomnia, migraines, right? Tension headaches, asthma, ulcers, high blood pressure. A lot of these things are really, really common. These are called psychophysiological or psychosomatic disorders. Now, psycho or psyche, oh my gosh, I almost spelled it wrong. Psyche means mind. And remember, soma means body. So these are literally like mind-body disorders, right? Disorders that affect the mind and the body. There's a little bit of an interplay. So with these, there are physical issues going on, right? You actually do have a headache, right? You have ulcers, you have something physical going on, but they're largely contributed to by stress or anxiety, right? So there's kind of more of an interplay with these. So for example, maybe you struggle to sleep at night because you're so stressed out that you can't put that stress away enough to fall asleep. That's definitely me, like every night. Like I have such a hard time falling asleep at night ever since like COVID started. I've had a harder time sleeping, but a lot of people struggle with insomnia that's related to stress or anxiety. How many of you get migraines or headaches like pretty frequently? Migraines are very commonly brought on by stress or anxiety. Right, a lot of contributors from stress. I struggle with like TMJ related issues. So I will clench my jaw all the time. I catch myself doing it constantly. I don't even like consciously feel it because I do it so often. And I have to always be like, stop and like relax my jaw. It gives me headaches because it creates all this tension in my neck. And then it causes me to have headaches from it. Very common to get stomach aches when you're stressed out. People can go all the way to ulcers, right? And it can exacerbate things like asthma and blood pressure, right? So very, very common that people struggle with some degree of like physical issues as a result of stress. And so with these disorders, they're much less dramatic than the other ones, but they're way more common. right? And there's some interplay of like mind, body things going on. Now, a few other kind of side thoughts related to all of these things that we're talking about. With all of these illnesses, like the psychophysiological or psychosomatic ones, there's a lot of different factors at play. And one of them tends to be personality style, right? Every single person has a different like stress and anxiety threshold, right? Some people can handle so much stress before it breaks them or like causes them to really feel it. Other people crumple at like the tiniest bit of stress, right? My poor mother-in-law in Vegas, like the tiniest bit of stress, and it's like she breaks out the rum and like is like frantic, right? Like some people just can't handle their stress very well. And your personality style and how well you handle stress plays a big role in how vulnerable you might be to these things, right? And a very flawed research experiment, but it's one that still gets referenced a lot. Years ago, there was an experiment done by tobacco companies to look at the effects of like personality and stress on heart health. And again, it was very biased because it was funded by this, like by a cigarette company. But what we came out with was that there are different personality styles that can contribute to your overall health. Now, this is very, very simplistic, but the idea behind it is a good one. Right? Type A personalities are more like, I'm going to climb the mountain and conquer it as fast and hard as I can because it's there. Right? And type B are more like, oh, the mountain's not going anywhere. I can take my time. Right? It's there and it's not going to, nothing's going to change. Right? I'm more mellow and laid back and relaxed. In general, people who are more like relaxed and less aggressive and kind of more mellow in the way that they deal with things tend to have less stress than people who are more like impatient, competitive, and ambitious. Not always, but that was kind of a finding that they found. And I think we can go globally from this and say that your personality style can have an impact on how you experience stress and how it affects your body as well. So again, kind of overly simplistic, but the idea behind it is a sound one. One other kind of side note to that, there's a branch of psychology called psychoneuroimmunology. A nice long word, right? Psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI for short, that looks at the connections between stress and health, specifically stress in your immune system and health and illness. You ever notice that you're most likely to get sick, like right around finals week, or maybe right after finals week, after you've made it through finals? Like during finals, it's like everybody's sniffling and coughing, which is probably really bad this year of all years, right? But we tend to get sick when we're stressed out. And there's a reason for that. When you're stressed, all of that energy that could have gone toward fighting off bacteria or viruses is instead being used to fight off and deal with the stress. And so what happens is your immune system becomes compromised and you're more vulnerable to getting sick. It can also make diseases that you already have accelerate and kind of progress faster. So it's very common as part of something like maybe a cancer treatment or like a more global health treatment that you have to look at a person's stress levels, because if you can lower their stress, you increase their immune system functioning, and that might help them to fight off whatever it is that they're battling, or at least slow down that progression. So it's a very common link that stress can impair our health because it disrupts the ability of the immune system to fight off those different bacteria or viruses or cancer cells or whatever it might be. So just a very strong correlation. And again, something I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, that when you're at the peak of your stress, you're likely to get sick, or just after, like it's like you made it through on adrenaline and then you crash afterward and you tend to get sick. I think there's like one or two more slides, but any questions or thoughts or comments before we keep going? All right. So when it comes to treating some of these like psychosomatic, psychophysiological disorders, there's a whole group called behavioral medicines that focuses on like combining psychological and physical interventions to help prevent some of these problems. And I made a whole list here of things that tend to be focused on when we're trying to tackle psychosomatic disorders, but we could go just like really easy. It's not even up here because it's so like common sense. If you have a lot of stress in your life, finding ways to balance that with things that you enjoy, right? Finding ways to just break up that stress. right? For my partner, it's TikTok, right? Like whenever she's stressed, like TikTok comes out, right? And she'll spend like an hour wasting it just watching TikTok, right? And that for her makes her feel better, like laughing at those clips, and like it's a stress reliever, right? For me, it's often like a game on my phone. Like I'll play, what I forgot the name, it's like where you move the boxes around because I'm practicing for escape rooms, right? So it just, something to break it up. Maybe you go listen to music, or you go exercise, you do something that you enjoy. That will help balance out your stress, at least a little bit. Sometimes our stress is higher than we can do anything about, but trying to find ways to balance it is important. We can also do more formal things like relaxation training or meditation or even hypnosis. Biofeedback is a really interesting one. People who have a lot of stress and it's causing physical issues can sometimes go through like a biofeedback evaluation. And I did this for my jaw years ago. I didn't realize that I was constantly clenching my jaw muscles and my neck muscles. And so they put these little sensors all over your body, and it measures muscle tension. And then you become aware of where you're holding your tension, and then you can work on letting it go or trying to relax it and to help with that, the things that it's causing. So biofeedback is kind of measuring how your body is responding, where you're holding all that tension, and then trying to work on relaxing it. We could do different types of therapy, mindfulness training that we looked at a couple weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago. You had that mindfulness training exercise or activity that you did as part of a discussion. Mindfulness is huge for handling stress and anxiety. Aromatherapy, kind of an interesting side one. A lot of people use smells and like candles or some kind of aromatherapy to help. And then there are 2 really cool free apps. I don't know if have any of you ever used Calm or Headspace before? I love the Calm app, right? Like it has like those beautiful soundscapes. I'll just put them on and pretend like I'm somewhere where it's raining because it's so peaceful. And then it has the sleep stories, which are distracting for me. I put them on and then I can't sleep because I want to know what's going to happen in the story. Totally defeats the purpose, but it has all these really cool things on there. If you've never tried Calm, it's kind of a fun free app that you can check out. I think most of it is free, and then if you want to like upgrade to like a different version of it, you can. And Headspace is a little more like therapy based. It's a little bit more like cognitive behavioral interventions, but both of them are wonderful apps for helping to manage and deal with stress and anxiety. But it could be as simple as, again, doing something that you enjoy. I've tried really hard over these last like couple of years to do more and more like little relaxation exercises. So whether it's like a 2-minute guided visualization or like a 5-minute like relaxation like thing, there's a bunch of free ones online. And I found one that I really, really love. I don't think I shared it with you, the forest walk. Did I play that for you in the stress unit? Right? No? So I have one that is really fun. Does anyone want to do it? Like right now, a relaxation exercise. I got 1 yes, 2 yeses. I just needed 1 and I got 3. So let's do it. Was that a question?
Yeah, no, I'm ready.
You're down? Okay, I like it. All right, so I love that you were like, let's do it. So what I have here, this is my favorite one of like all time. I think it's because it's through a forest. And so for some reason that really, it just resonates with me. I really love being outdoors. But it's about 10 minutes long. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off the light. Try not to fall asleep. So that means you were relaxed, I guess. So we kind of won a little bit. But I'm going to turn off the light, and then they'll tell you to get as comfortable as you can. Now, I know this environment is not comfortable, right? Like you're in a desk. For me, the desks are always too small. But you're in a desk, you're around people you don't know, you're wearing a mask, but do your best to be as comfortable as you can be. And try your best to follow along, right? If you get distracted, that's okay. Just try and come back when you can. And we'll go through it, and then we can talk about it afterward. So just try and get yourself as kind of situated as you can. And here we go. There's nothing to look at. It's just audio. So it's just a black screen. All right.
Guided imagery is a powerful relaxation technique. In this exercise, you will be guided into a beautiful, tranquil forest. As your imagination is guided through various sensory suggestions, your body and mind will respond as though what you are imagining is real. So if you are feeling tense or stressed, This will help shift your mood to one of peace and relaxation. So begin by finding a comfortable place to relax and make sure you're warm. Placing yourself into a nice, comfortable position, either sitting or lying down on a bed, couch, or the floor. And when you're ready, close your eyes. Begin by taking a nice, slow, deep breath, deep into the belly. Hold the breath for a brief moment and release the breath. Once again, nice deep breath in, hold, and now release. As you release the breath, let go of any tension, surrendering the weight of your body onto the surface that you're lying on. One last time, deep breath in, hold, and now exhale. Feel yourself beginning to relax and let go. Now imagine you're walking along a path in a beautiful secluded forest on a bright, sunny autumn morning. The path is soft underneath your shoes. You can hear each of your footsteps against the forest floor, where there are fallen leaves, pine needles, twigs, and moss. As you walk along the path, you can feel a gentle, cool breeze caressing your cheeks. You hear the birds singing and the leaves of the trees as they rustle in the wind. As you continue to walk, you feel relaxed and your mind clears more and more with each step you take. The fresh air is revitalizing as you take a nice deep breath in and as you continue to walk through the forest. You notice the tall trees around you. The red and golden leaves look magnificent, and you stop for a moment to take in this beautiful scenery around you. You notice a red leaf falling from a tree as it dances and twirls in the air before slowly fluttering down to rest along with the others. In the distance, you hear the babbling of a stream. As you look ahead, you notice the sun dappling through the trees, and you see the sun reflection upon the gurgling stream that runs along the edge of the forest. You continue to tread carefully into the forest, over the crackling red and golden leaves, and the broken twigs and pine cones that are scattered across the ground. It is very peaceful here, and the deeper you venture into the forest, the deeper into relaxation you fall. And you're filled with a deep sense of peace and tranquility. You pause a while and rest against an old oak tree. And you feel the rough bark of the tree against your fingers. You look down and you notice a patch of soft green moss that covers a smooth, large rock, and its lushness invites you to sit down for a while. The tree welcomes you to lean against its bark so that you feel comfortable. While sitting quietly beneath this oak tree, you enjoy the peace and stillness. You feel nourished by the warmth of the sun on your body, and you feel a deep connection to all that is around you. You feel the warmth of the sun soothing and relaxing your head, your back, your shoulders, arms, and legs. Your whole body is peaceful and relaxed. Take a few moments and enjoy this deep sense of peace and relaxation. Now bring your awareness back to where you're sitting beneath the oak tree and see yourself slowly standing up. You brush off any leaves or moss that may be on your clothes. You take a final look at the beautiful scenery around you. And when you're ready, follow the trail back as you proceed to leave the forest. Now bring your awareness back to the room. Become aware of the surface beneath you. Notice the sounds in the room. Feel yourself awaken. And when you're ready, open your eyes, feeling refreshed, alert, relaxed.
All right. Who's ready for a nap? All right, that made me sleepy a little bit, but it's interesting. I don't know if any of you, how many of you have like a smart watch or anything like that? And I should have mentioned it before, but I'm always monitoring my heart rate. And it's so interesting to watch, like when it started, mine was at like 90 something, and then it just went way down. Like just taking those deep breaths and being calm and closing your eyes like that can do so much to lower your like physiological arousal, right? Which plays a role in our stress response. And it might make you a little sleepy, right? But it oftentimes has that kind of calming effect to it. How many of you at some point struggled, like you were distracted at some point in there, right? That's so normal. So don't feel bad if that was the case. Like I had a moment, I was like, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch. Let's focus, right? Like dinner tonight, are we going out? Focus. That's all food. Of course, I was thinking about food, but that's okay, right? The more that you do these things, the better you get at being present in them. But if you get distracted, you just come back. But I don't know, I always love that one because it's so like forest based. And I was laughing because like my screen, right? Forest, right? That was my forest I was in. So, you know, it's all about like finding ones that work for you. But that one is 10 minutes. You can find a bunch that are like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, even just taking a few deep breaths, right? And it's really funny. I have like a breathing app on my phone. I forget what it's called, but it has you take like 10 deep breaths and it monitors your heart rate. And I do it all the time. Like when I don't have time to do something like that, I'll just like close my eyes and take a few deep breaths. And like that'll calm you down. And it's gotten to the point where my kids, it's really cute. They'll be like, can we do the breathing exercise? But they like to do it so they can mess with my heart rate because it tells you the heart rate. They're like, I want to see if I can get your heart rate to go way up. Like you're missing the point, right? But it's cute. Like sometimes they'll be like, can we do the breathing? I need to take a deep breath. Like you can do that anytime on your own, but yes, you can. And I'll put my watch on and watch their heart rate. But any of these kind of things can help with managing stress, along with again trying to find ways to balance and do things you enjoy. So again, this whole chapter I think built really nicely on the one that came before it. A lot of interplay in relationship with stress and anxiety. Any like last thoughts or comments or any questions, anything to share at all before we move on? Okay, so our next chapter, then let's close this one. Our next chapter is chapter 6, which will look at disorders related to mood. Let me bring this up here. So we talked about anxiety disorders back in chapter 4. Anxiety disorders are by far the most common disorders that people struggle with, especially in the last couple of years. We've seen anxiety disorders just go way, way up in general, but mood disorders are a close second. A lot of people struggle with depression or with mania, with bipolar disorder, the things that we'll talk about in this chapter, very, very common. How many of you know someone who struggles with depression or bipolar or something to that extent? A lot of you, right? They're relatively common disorders. And so we'll talk about those. We'll talk about depression, we'll talk about mania, and when you have both of them, which would be bipolar disorder. So that will be our focus of the next couple of classes. And so mood disorders are when people are dealing with the emotional extremes, right? All of us have fluctuations in mood. That's totally normal and typical. It would be odd if your mood didn't change based on the things that happen in your life. But people who have mood disorders, their emotional states might not always be appropriate to the situation. Maybe they're more extreme, or they last like quite a bit longer than we might consider to be typical, right? So this is beyond just kind of normal variations in mood. And we can think about mood as kind of being represented by a spectrum of 2 poles, right? So the bottom pole, or the end pole on one end and on the other. So the extreme low end of mood would be depression. And the extreme high end of mood would be mania. And then you could consider like everything in here to be kind of like typical, we could say normal mood, right? And all of us kind of go back and forth, right? Good things are happening, you're up here. Things are difficult, maybe you're down here, right? But people who suffer from depression or mania are kind of beyond the normal realm of mood variation, right? Depression is much more than just being sad, right? Sadness is really common. We all experience sadness. Depression is like a very, very low state, right? There's another level of intensity. And mania is a very, very up and agitated state beyond kind of just a good mood. So what we see is that people can have one or the other, or sometimes they can have both. If people have depression and mania, So if they have both of them, and we call that bipolar disorder. Now, this used to be called manic depression. Manic depression makes total sense, right? But we changed the name to bipolar disorder because there's actually a couple of different levels of mania, which we'll talk about. And so people can have bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. We'll talk about both of them probably next week. But people who have both have bipolar disorder. Otherwise, you could just have one or the other. Now, I have a slide separately, but just to introduce these, right? Depression, again, is the low end, right? Sadness, like significant sadness, lack of energy, low self-worth, not enjoying things anymore. Depression, I think, is something most people are familiar with. A lot of people struggle with depression. Mania tends to be a little more, I think, a little less common for people to have seen, but mania is like an extreme up where people are really frenzied. They oftentimes get themselves into trouble. There's a lot of like activities with high potential for consequences, exaggerated belief, you might not sleep a lot. They're the opposite poles of mood, right? One pole here, one pole there. And if you have both poles, we call it bipolar, or 2 poles. So that's where that term comes from. And again, we'll look at each one of these separately, but just to kind of introduce them here. So we'll start with depression, and we'll talk about the different symptoms and things that are related to depression. And then next week, we'll add mania and talk about bipolar disorder. A lot of you raised your hand as knowing people who struggle with one of these. Anyone willing to share any like thoughts or comments about depression? Like people, either yourself or people in your life. What does that look like? What anything to share? Yeah.
I would just say to always find your friends. Even if you don't get paid for the people probably not.
Okay, like when people are depressed, you mean, like you said, to check in on them. Okay, I love that, right? I try and do that anyway, right? But it's, especially if you know they're struggling, that's great, right? But anyone who's struggled with depression or have people in your life who have, anyone want to describe what that can look like or elements of that, either yourself or someone in your life who struggled with depression? Yeah.
I look that a lot of the times it's kind of like the people that you don't expect. And it can also be people that you do expect, doesn't really have like a specific work to it.
Sure.
A lot of times, someone can just be, just because what you express on the outside is in what goes on inside.
Sure.
So someone could be struggling with depression and is like the happiest person you know. Or you could be struggling with depression and those people who do, I've heard that it's like you don't understand sometimes why you feel a certain way.
Sure.
It's just sometimes you feel that way and it's like, that's why you go and help it.
Yeah, and I love that you're saying like it's not always so obvious, right? I don't know why, but as you were describing that, I thought of Robin Williams, right, who struggled intensely with depression, but he was one of the like outwardly most like happy, outgoing people that you could imagine, right? But he struggled so deeply with his depression that he took his own life from it. And so it's not always obvious, right? There isn't like a set like profile of somebody who might have depression. I love that. You had your hand up too, yeah.
My boyfriend got shipped out to Korea in the army. And so like being away from his family and everything really down.
Yeah. Right.
Seeing him that like low was really hard.
Yeah, and it's an incredible low, right? And oftentimes being removed from your family or like a comfortable environment can bring that kind of stuff on for people. When I was counseling up at Humboldt State, when I was an intern, a lot of people who would come in, a lot of students would come in struggling with depression. They missed their family, they missed their friends, they missed home, right? And oftentimes that would be something that would trigger it for them. Any other like thoughts or anything? Yeah.
Like my boyfriend had cancer after the first semester of college. Really bad depression during that time. And I think it's like important that when someone comes to with depression, like it's important not to just like tell them that they immediately need to go get help. Instead, just be there to listen to them.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, we need to go see a doctor.
Sure.
Because like I think that usually they know it's time for that.
And it's a tough balance, right? Because you don't want to be like, oh, you need to go get help. And you also don't want to be like, well, just stop it,
Yeah.
You know, like we'll just stop being sad, right? My partner's family, very like traditional Catholic Hispanic family, they don't believe in like mental illness for the most part, right? Or like going to therapy. And so whenever there's anyone who's depressed, they're just like, well, just get over it, like just move on. You know, a lot of people have that mentality, or on the flip side, like, oh, you need to go see someone immediately. And it is nice, right? If you can just kind of be there, as both of you said, right? Check in with your friends, be there for your friends or family when they're struggling. And this is very, very common. A lot of people, especially in these last 2 years, a lot of people struggled with depression who maybe had never had it before, right? Being isolated out. Like, I have to tell you, the first 6 weeks of the semester, or 5 weeks, like I was home in my house by myself, like every day, all the time. And then I couldn't see any of you. So I'm teaching to a black screen. I've never felt more isolated ever. Like, because the first year and a half of the pandemic, my kids were home. Like I had literally no, like no private time ever. Like there was always kids in my house. My partner was home. We all taught from home. But then this year was the first time where like I was the only one still home. So I was so excited when we got to come back. It's like people, right? Like just, I mean, this last couple of years, a lot more people have struggled with depression than we've seen in the past. So let's talk about this a little bit. I'm gonna erase this so I can put the symptoms up here. So 2 poles, right? We talked about that there's 2 ends of mood. If somebody has major or unipolar depression, unipolar means 1 pole. So major or unipolar depression is someone who struggles with depression without any history of a manic episode. So they just have depression. Not to say that it's, you know, depression is not like worthy, right? But they don't have any mania, is what I mean. So people can have depression on its own. And in order to be diagnosed with unipolar or major depression, you have to have a major depressive episode. So that's the criteria. In order to qualify for unipolar depression, you have to have a major depressive episode. So we'll talk about the symptoms for major depressive episodes. You have to have 5 or more of a wide variety of symptoms that last for a minimum of 2 weeks. Now, sometimes this can last for months for people, but it has to last at least 2 weeks, more often than not during that time. And it has to be disabling. It's affecting your life. Think of those 5 Ds that we talked about forever ago. It has to be disrupting your life in some way. So again, it's more than just being kind of down. It's disabling in some way. So lots of different symptoms. Again, you have to have 5 or more over at least 2 weeks. So let's look at some of the common symptoms of depression. And I'm not going to list all of them, but some of the more common ones. One of them is weight loss or weight gain. It can go either way. Sometimes people, when they're depressed, are have so little motivation that they just don't even care to eat. Like food doesn't hold any appeal anymore, and they lose weight because they're eating less. Other times people, when they're depressed, eat and eat and eat, and almost like they're trying to fill a void, and they might gain weight from it. Right, so it can go in either direction. Both of them are very common. You have a diminished interest or pleasure in activities. The things that you used to enjoy, you just don't find enjoyable anymore. Right? You used to love to go out and hang out with your friends, but you don't want to. It's just not something that sounds fun, right? The things that you used to find pleasure, like enjoyment in, you just are less interested in, right? You don't find that you want to do them. You don't have the motivation to do them. And even if you were to do them, you don't find pleasure in. Right? So there's a lot of lack of pleasure from the things that you would totally or typically find to be enjoyable. Oftentimes there's insomnia or hypersomnia. Insomnia, we just talked about, right? Somebody who has a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep. Hypersomnia is somebody who sleeps all the time, right? So you don't want to get out of bed. You just want to sleep. Sometimes people who are depressed will sleep all day, right? You literally cannot get them out of bed. There's no motivation. They just want to sleep. If you get too much sleep, it can actually make you even more tired. Right. So sometimes it backfires on us when we sleep too much. And obviously not sleeping well can also cause you to be tired and exhausted in the same way. There's a fatigue or loss of energy. you're exhausted, even though you haven't necessarily done anything, right? It's different from like you physically exerted yourself and you're tired. I ran around the softball bases with my kids 4 times last night, and I was like limping my way out exhausted. Like, I know that's sad, but I ran around 4 times. I gave it my all, and I beat them all every time. Good for me. I beat 7-year-olds, right? But I felt so proud of myself. I'm like, it's so fast, right? And then I was exhausted afterward. It's different than that. This is like exhaustion without doing anything, right? So you're tired, even though you haven't necessarily exerted yourself in any way. Oftentimes there is, let's see what else I want to put on here, feelings of worthlessness or guilt. People typically feel like they're worthless, low self-esteem, feeling guilty for not being involved in things, the effect it might have on other people. There's oftentimes hopelessness that can come with that. And hopelessness is a very strong correlator to things like suicidal thoughts and gestures, which we'll talk more about in chapter 7. There's a reduced ability to think or concentrate. It's like you're in a mental fog, right? It can make it very difficult to remember things, like you're taking an exam and your mind is just blurry, right? It's hard to think straight. It's hard to remember. It's hard to focus and to concentrate. People often describe it as like a mental fog that they're in. It might make it difficult to make decisions as well. There's often thoughts of death or suicide. Not always, but very common when people feel worthless or guilty or hopeless, they start considering or thinking about suicidality, which again, we'll talk more about in chapter 7. And then there's one more that's not super common, but it can happen. It's called psychomotor agitation. Much more common with mania, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But it's like a purposeless, unintentional movement or gesture that you do repeatedly. So it could be like putting on a sweatshirt and taking it off repeatedly, kind of like mindlessly. It could be wringing your hands. It could maybe be like tapping or like pulling on like hair or pulling on something on you. It's kind of like an unintentionally done gesture or movement. It's not super common, but it is one of the criteria that could manifest. But typically it's these ones over here. These are very, very common symptoms of depression, and they have to last at least 2 weeks, and they have to be interfering with your life in some way, right? So these are the very common ones, 5 or more of them. And if people have 5 or more of these for at least 2 weeks, then we qualify for a major depressive episode, which means we can then diagnose them with unipolar or major depression. And the reason that we do it as episodes is because we also can have a manic episode, which we'll talk about next week. And so if you're having both types of episodes, it changes your diagnosis. That's why we divide it up with this extra step. There's also one called persistent depressive disorder, or dysthymic disorder was the old name. Dysthymia means like sadness or melancholy. And so with this one, people have 5 or more, but it lasts at least 2 years, but it's on a lower level. Right? So this is somebody who's like chronically at like a low level of depression. And it's very often missed. Like it might be mistaken for your personality or just your typical mood, but it's somebody who's kind of chronically low and having like a less disabling but longer lasting level of depression. This is much more common, but there is that one other kind of a way that it might present itself as well. I have an example of this as a clip. I have been booed for this clip, I will tell you, but I'm going to play it for you anyway. I kind of think that's funny, but I have been booed for it in the past. So the example that I have for you is Bella from New Moon. Nobody booed. That's a good start. But it's such a great example. This little clip shows like a lot of these symptoms. So watch out for these in the clip. I'll ask you to identify them after. We can talk about it for a moment. But it's a really, really good example of somebody who's depressed, right? And struggling with these different symptoms. So I will play it for you. And you can boo me if you'd like, but I'm sure somebody will want to like biological, right? So it can be something biological, or it could be something that is more environmentally based, or like an event that happened to you. And for her, it's obviously more of like a circumstance. But we'll talk about some of the different causes of it, and biology is a big one. Yeah.
So Just to clarify, just, you have, so you be like, diagnosed with major depressive disorder to have, you know, or
Depression, so you have to have a major depressive episode, and that allows you to qualify for major or unipolar depression. And again, the only reason they do that is so that we can also, if you have a manic episode, so we can talk about bipolar in terms of episodes. And so it's more so that we can add that other layer if it shows up. Because sometimes what happens, and I had clients that were this way, is you'll see somebody for months and you only see the depression, or they've been in like a depressive episode for months, and then all of a sudden they have a manic episode. So you could end up diagnosing someone with unipolar depression and then change it later, should you maybe then add like a manic episode on top of it. So yeah, it's a little confusing. You have to have an episode in order to have the diagnosis. Other thoughts, comments, anything else for the moment here? Oh, let's do one more slide and then we'll probably be done for the day. Look, one more time. Just kidding. So as I said, there's a lot of different reasons why people develop depression. The biological ones are really big ones. Right. So as I said, it could be an event, but oftentimes people struggle with biological factors that contribute pretty heavily to depression. And it can be somewhat genetic, right? So there's like I want to ask you this, but like a 27% likelihood, right, that if one of your genetically or biological parents has depression, that you could also in turn get it. Now, that doesn't mean you're doomed to get it, but you might be a little more vulnerable than the average person, right? So there is a somewhat genetic component to it, same with bipolar disorder, but it doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to have it, just a little more vulnerable than the average person. Yeah.
Could grandparents affect that too?
Sure, yeah, because it could always skip, generations. So anyone biologically connected to you, sibling, a parent, a grandparent, might make you. The rates are a little lower, I think, for grandparents, but it's about 27% for a parent. Makes sense. So genetics can play a role, but the biggest one up here by far is the second bullet. Biochemical factors, neurotransmitters play a huge role in depression. And there are kind of three big ones. I have the two biggest up here, but there's one more. Norepinephrine, serotonin, and then also dopamine. Right? Those three neurotransmitters play a huge role in people being depressed. People who have like a chemically induced depression have very low activity of norepinephrine, serotonin, and also dopamine. The levels of those things are very, very low. And so we can give those people a medication, which we'll talk about next week. We can give them a drug to boost serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine to help them feel better, right? So biggest culprit by far are these neurotransmitters, right? They're thought to play a really prominent role in people developing depression. There's also one other thing that's relatively new. It's kind of interesting. We discovered this not that long ago, but we possess brain circuits, right? Kind of networks of brain structures that work together and trigger each other in unique ways. And we discovered a brain circuit for depression, right? A brain circuit, like a cluster of structures that's thought to lead to someone being more vulnerable to depression. And so the brain circuit for depression, here it says here, there's a couple of different structures in it. And if all of them are working together in like the improper way, it kind of creates a perfect storm where people are more vulnerable to developing depression. All of these, again, are biological reasons. We'll talk about other ones next week. But the brain circuits that are involved, so you have the hippocampus, which plays a really big role in memory, right? And so people who are depressed oftentimes struggle with their memory. Again, they're in kind of like a mental fog. It's very, very common. So the hippocampus in somebody who's depressed tends to be very like undersized. Sit out their side. All right, so its activity level's a little bit lower in somebody who's depressed. We also see the prefrontal cortex. The frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex play a big role in like decision-making, thinking processes. And what we see is that these areas have very low activity in somebody who's depressed. So again, these structures are all kind of firing on each other, working together to create that perfect storm. We also see the amygdala. I always remember that Amy G. Dalla in my head, it's like the worst word to spell, right? The amygdala is very overactive. The amygdala controls a lot of our emotional reactions to things. And so somebody's amygdala is overreactive. They're more emotional and more reactive than the average person might be. And then finally, there's this tiny, tiny little region in the brain called Brodmann area 25. And this tiny little area is extremely rich in serotonin receptors. Serotonin being one of the key culprits, right, biochemically for depression. And so what we see is that we have all of these things kind of working together, right? And this area then becomes less active. And so it's producing less serotonin, which is causing then people to have a more overactive amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is low activity. The hippocampus is undersized. All of these things are then working together and they create that perfect storm, which can lead to depression. And we can change it in a couple of different ways. Like we can tackle the biochemical piece and increase serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Or we can also do some brain stimulation methods, which we'll talk about again more next week, to try and increase the activity in some of these different areas in the brain. So there's a couple of different ways that we can go about it, but these biological factors really play a very prominent role in people developing depression. And luckily, there's a lot of things that we can do to change this, but they can take some time and a little bit of trial and error, which we'll talk about more next class. So the big things here, again, are all these factors, and we can oftentimes look to medicine or some kind of treatment to turn them around a little bit. So what we'll do when I see you next, week, we will keep going. We'll talk about the different types of antidepressant drugs and other kind of methods for depression. So we'll keep going next week with chapter 6. So I hope you have another wonderful weekend. Very exciting to say that to you so soon. But have a great weekend. I'll see you all on Tuesday, and we'll keep going with the rest of this chapter.